I went out of my way to document a circumstantial case for the Second World War German specialty research programs into weaponry and other things, much of which have been neglected in the history books ever since, and little of it has been touched by researchers truly going in depth as to what really took place. Much of the archival information and the documentation is still classified or outright missing. In this series, I'm trying to rectify that. I'm trying to build a case strong enough to allow the archives and the various governments that are sitting on much of this information to be compelled to open up. Let us research, let us dig in some of the sites. I have gone to many of these sites specifically to show you exactly where this research took place in order for us to better judge what it could have been. And many of these research programs was overseen and conducted or constructed by a very young and dynamic SS general named Hans Kammler. It seemed whenever the Third Reich needed something built fast and large and in secrecy, they would call on General Kammler. I have followed in his footsteps. I have gone through the underground caves, the tunnels, the underground factories, the potential Führer headquarters that was built around Germany, Poland, and Austria. At every turn in every country, I have met with local historians, special researchers who have researched and looked into this for years, the specialists on these areas. I'm trying to compel a red thread through the public narrative and what is actually to be seen on the ground. Witness testimony dating back to the time of the war that does match up with surveillance footage and contemporary information and documentation. This is not about mindless conspiracies. This is about the thousands of people who died creating secrets that we are not privy to today. This is about the miles and miles of secret constructed underground tunnels that are now missing today, being denied by various governments that are still covering up what actually took place. This is about money. This is about war, technology that is probably still in use somewhere today. This is about scientists, about history, legacy, and as it is with all things, it's all about location, location, location. I'm going to all the locations, crawl through them, and show you what was there, and I'll tell you what they say is supposed to be there, and you can judge. What do you think? There are a few things one must keep in mind when looking back on the Third Reich. One is that we live in a world where the SS were setting the agenda. And one also needs to remember that it was an organization with deep ties to German industry and a strong belief in capitalism. From the outset of his campaign in the 20s, Hitler courted various big businesses, bankers, successfully. Relationships were made already then, most of which we can follow during the war, leading to a vast complex of special and top-secret research projects. Many of them were controlled by the SS, but even when not, they were still never very far away and could at any point access any other projects or findings. Now make no mistake about it, the SS was a profitable business, and the money was made on obtaining business contracts for the Reich, renting out forced laborers. As the SS ran most of the concentration camp system, they had control over millions of prisoners that were put to work, rented out to businesses, hired by the SS, and everybody made money. Now General Kammler would recruit the best scientists, both known and unknown, for his secret research staff, the Kammlerstab. And it seems that he was everywhere, building everything. Regardless where I went, from the submarine pens, V2 test sites, to underground Führer headquarters, his name kept turning up. In the final years of the war, both he and Himmler both knew what was at stake. The Allied bombing of German cities and industry made it critical to build enormous underground complexes for construction. Also, Hitler's various headquarters needed to be reinforced, and much of the secret research was decentralized for safety as well. Yet in the middle of all this underground construction, we still find special S-Vorhabe construction projects. Following briefings to Hitler and contemporary claims that two of them were to be large headquarters for Hitler and his staff, that would be Project Riese and the S3 in Jonastal near Odorf, Germany. Both had 26 or 28,000 forced laborers, and an enormous amount of resources were spent on both sites. Hitler was briefed on both repeatedly, and yet, interestingly enough, there's practically nothing to see in either one of these sites. However, something is missing from the official story, and something is missing that can still be found. And after what I have so far seen, I have doubts that either one of them were actually to be headquarters for Hitler at all. But to this we must add, there were huge underground factories being built by Dr. Kammler, some far larger, and yet built with far fewer laborers and resources. I wager that the top leaders within the SS knew of the later part of the war. They were losing it, and they needed to make plans for the survival of their ideology, their technology, and many investments to protect their money and their futures, and I can promise you they did all of these. Now, besides the forced labor pool and the numbers, we also know that Organization Tod, whom oversaw many of the construction projects in the Reich, was run by Albert Speer after Fritz Tod died in a plane accident, and it was managed by Xavier Dorsch. And from his post-war testimony, we know that the Germans had expertly and precisely calculated exactly what was needed of material, labor, and time in order to build anything, anywhere, and in any material underground whatsoever. And thousands of private companies were also hired and paid for their services in these projects. So, from this we can gauge what would have been possible to build in the various special construction projects when we compare them to all of those that has been constructed and finished and was in use, and thereby giving you a better idea of what was possible and what was actually done. As for the special research in some of these, we'll get back. In the middle of the German armaments industrial complex at Oranienburg lay the factory Auerwerke. It produced uranium oxide, amongst other things. It was founded by Auer von Welsbach in 1885 and had from then produced various radioactive products, including that of extracting thorium oxide after Otto Hahn's discovery. From 1934, the company belonged to Degussa AG Frankfurt with over 10,000 employees in the armaments industry. Otto Hahn discovered nuclear fission in 1938. Before the war, all research institutes were reunified under Nicholas Rehl, who, along with Otto Hahn, they both understood the importance of the nuclear discovery, both economic and militarily. In the spring of 1939, they met with the Army Research Office to discuss the feasibility of the practical use of nuclear fission. The Army requested that Auerwerke provide several tons of uranium compounds from their stocks. They, in turn, immediately built a production plant to produce uranium oxide for the Army's testing. By 1940, the first 240 grams of high-pure uranium metal was delivered. In 1945, when the facility fell to the Russians, 330 tons of uranium materials and 7 tons of metallic uranium was found. This was the materials the Russians used to start their first reactor in 1946. Both Nicholas Rehl and Manfred von Ardenne, along with other German scientists, were brought to Russia to accomplish this. It is safe to say that the Russian nuclear program leading to their bomb development was founded by German materials, uranium, and scientists. Post-war speculations have now begun to surface that the U.S. nuclear bomb project also benefited at a greater extent than previously believed from German research, blueprints, and materials of which we now know there were a lot more than we have been led to believe. Now, not far from where von Braun tested his first rockets at the Army test range at Kummersdorf. On this property, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, working along with the Army Research Center, built the first nuclear reactor at Gottow. The program was run by Erich Schumann, chief of the Heereswaffenamt and an explosives expert, and Kurt Diebner, nuclear scientist. They were both party men, and they were looking for a self-sustaining nuclear reaction, but on the fourth trial test it began to run away from them, and they had to halt the experiment, but certainly not the program. They were both looking for a bomb. On May 8, 1945, the day the war ended, the Russians arrived here at Gottow and packed everything up and sent it to Moscow. Of course, by this time Diebner was conducting his tests far from here, near Jonastal in fact, and most of the papers pertaining to the German test program are still classified. But clearly the Germans had far more fissionable material than what was alluded to by the Alsos teams. And a further note is that in 1944, two British scientists, the head of the Manhattan Project, noted that the main goal of the atomic bomb project was not to keep the Germans from getting it, but to keep the Russians from getting it. Seems much more likely that a deal could be done with German scientists and with Dr. Kammler. As the story behind these large structures, were they just ramblings of a madman? Hitler wanted large concrete structures full of rebar, we're told, and the German developers' structures were deeply rotted with infighting agendas and opposing forces. However, there were extremely intelligent people behind the scenes. The directors of AEG, IG Farben, Krupp, bankers like Thyssen, spies like Canaris and Galen, driven engineers like Kammler, and far-sighted organizers like Himmler and Bormann. Like them or not, these were men who understood the development technologies, perhaps better than Hitler. These were also men who could keep information from Hitler should they wish to do so. So maybe instead of looking at all these individual structures and developments we visited for these past many years, what if they all really tied together in a bigger picture? Certainly some of them were last-minute stopgap measures in order to try to fix a specific wartime situation or problem. But some of the German special projects were so much more, and some of them began before the war, and some of them did not stop just because the war ended. There were several secret projects in Germany at the time. There were far more advanced nuclear bomb projects than we've been told officially. There were designs for a much larger rocket than the A4, the A10. New anti-aircraft missiles were coming offline, jet fighters, vastly improved true U-boats. And it was not long after the war that we saw all of these coming online, including in 1947 the patenting of the new nuclear propulsion units for large ships. It was patented by Kurt Diebner, the head of German Army's nuclear bomb project. So we are to believe he only came up with that idea within the year after the war ended, before it was patented. The A4 turned into the A10, that turned into the Saturn rocket. The V1 was called a dead-end technology, yet still today, its descendants, the cruise missile, flies around the world. The German jet designs fought over Korea. German technicians built rockets and nuclear weapons for both sides of the Cold War and sold their wartime knowledge to all parties afterwards. War was and is a moneymaker, then and now. Hitler was put in power by money donated by huge industries and bankers from all nations, apparently, all of them who benefited financially from the war. They spent millions of his Reichsmarks on developing technologies that are still in use today, and most of these businesses are still in business today. Himmler had millions of low-cost forced laborers available to these industries and scientists working on all these projects. And after the war? Well, the common people, the worker, the soldiers, the civilians, they paid the price. The big businesses and bankers never did. They continued to benefit from what they had built with German industry during the war. So the question is, what ties what to projects here? Well, if we take nuclear scientist von Ardenne, he had developed a miniature nuclear weapon as he reported in 1943. Rolf Engel's rocket team and Wilhelm Voss' Skoda-Werke had secret research teams developing new technologies outside the known German armaments projects and industry, and with financial means funded by the SS exclusively. Kammler's jets, rockets, nuclear bomb tests conducted with Diebner and Schumann. Now, does any of this fit in the picture of a potential post-Hitler Reich? Speer's huge rocket bunkers, capable of housing weapons twice that of the A4. Why spend more material than needed at a time where these were scarce? The secret underground written about the blockhouse. Did you know that not all of the existing tunnels at Dora Mittelbau is currently known or to be found on the maps? And the trains from Dora ran straight to La Capole. Dora was an enormous underground factory for both V1s and V2s, situated some 75 kilometers from where Kammler, Schumann, and Diebner was working on testing a nuclear bomb. And according to many witnesses, 2 of them at least were tested before war's end. Now, if I was Heinrich Himmler in late 1944, and I knew of all these programs and was wondering if the Führer had not actually served his purpose or lost the plot somewhat, the war was not going well. There was now 2 options for this supposed all-knowing Himmler. Create the most dangerous technology the world had ever seen, try to speed it up, and actually win the war by using it. And look the other way if Hitler happened to be assassinated. Then clean up and take over. Or build the most advanced technology the world had ever seen, and being smart enough to know the war was lost, so build it, hide it, and use it to trade with. Either way, speed was needed, so all resources were set on these special projects. And at a time where Volkswagen could not even get the 1,700 laborers they needed to build the V1s, the one weapon that was actually hitting back at London for Hitler, Himmler had over 15,000 specific scientists, research, and trained personnel released from the army for the nuclear program. Done so, signed off by Hitler. And in his book Speer mentioned needing the sites around Project Riese. These were built to shelter over 20,000 key personnel, including Hitler. So what was he preparing to hide from? If it was true that von Ardenne had actually perfected a small tactical nuclear weapon, as stated, the size of a pineapple, as he claimed. Remember, he was personally sponsored by Hitler, and Kammler was on the board of directors, and after the war, Ardenne built his first nuclear bomb for Stalin, so he did know what he was doing. So why were the Germans building bunkers for V2 rockets that were not that accurate, but they would hit generally the center of a large city? So what if a small tactical nuclear warhead had been developed? It could be married to an A4. That would be a game changer. If Ardenne was actually correct in having made such a small tactical nuclear weapon, it would even fit in the London V3 guns missile. Even the flying V1 would carry such a small device. Now, the A-10 rocket could carry one to New York. These components were all in play or coming online towards the end of the war. Granted, yes, Germany ran out of time to deploy these, or Himmler took the second option for negotiation. When he finally introduced himself to the Allies and asked to see Eisenhower, he knew he was a man who had something to offer. He would deal with the Americans, but the British killed him before he could talk. So Kammler clearly went to the Americans, possibly tipped off by Churchill's order to outright kill ranking German officers. Kammler, Schellenberg, Gehlen, all could easily have been in contact with Allen Dulles in Switzerland. Or did I mention that no one has actually ever seen Wilhelm Canary's dead body or verified his death? All these men had every reason and means to have done a deal with Allen Dulles in Switzerland, where all the German industries were now sold, traded to Swiss holding companies or being bankrupted in the last days of the war's end. The money and deeds went abroad, the technicians went to work for the former Allies, and the world was never told the Germans detonated the first nuclear bomb, with intent to marrying it to a long-range rocket. But the German scientists and their financial partners got to live nice lives and keep doing what they always had done. When we look at these huge bunkers and shake our heads as to why they were built, they served a purpose, and maybe had a secondary objective that we are still not entirely being aware of. The war may be over, but the battle for the truth is not. And these huge remainders stand around the countrysides of Europe and can be investigated further, and should be. And we should never forget all of those who lost their lives in the pursuit of peace, or war, or financial gain.
My name is Tino Struckmann. I run Lost Battlefields. Every year, I travel around the world to try to bring you to all the most interesting historical military locations for modern wars and the World War II special projects, battlefields, forts, fortresses, and tunnels, everything else. Things you may not be able to see or go to yourselves. Please join me on Patreon or join Lost Battlefields through the website so you get access to all my files and my notes. It really does help, and like, follow, share here on the channel if you can. That helps too.